How can Uruguay lead Latin America in literacy and have the lowest corruption index? Many perceive Uruguay as significantly ahead of its regional counterparts, given its top position in literacy, lowest corruption index, and high rankings in human development, income equality, and life expectancy. So how did this small country manage to become the Switzerland of America? Are you interested in knowing? Alright, then stay until the end of the video. The territory of present-day Uruguay has been inhabited for several thousand years, although of course, with no more evidence than some archaeological findings, such as the Gruta del Palacio, the Cerritos de Indios, or the Antropolito de Mercedes. However, some populations persisted even until the arrival of the Europeans, such as the Minuanes, Guenonas, Aracanis, usually all of these grouped under the macro family of the well-known Charruas. It is believed that these nomadic peoples would inhabit a territory known as the Charrua complex, which would cover much of present-day Uruguay, as well as small territories of Argentina and Brazil. It is also worth noting that according to recent studies, the origin of most of the Charruas could have been in the provinces of Corrientes and Santa Fe, and they would have moved to present-day Uruguay, where only a few lived, in the 18th century after being expelled by the European conquerors. But well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The first European to arrive in Uruguayan territories would be Juan Díaz de Solís, who would discover the Rio de la Plata and would reach Punta Gorda. Although the indigenous people in the area, whether Charruas or Guaranis, would attack the newcomers, and in an act of cannibalism, the corpses were roasted and devoured. This dangerous territory would begin to be called the Eastern Strip, and the first settlement here would be San Lázaro, founded by Sebastián Gaboto. Although over time, the territory would lose interest due to the strong resistance of the indigenous people, as well as the absence of gold and silver. By 1533, the Inca Empire would fall in present-day Peru, so the created governorships would unify into the Viceroyalty of Peru, which, although initially did not reach Uruguayan territory, by the end of the 16th century, it already covered some nearby territories, such as the settlements in Asunción and Buenos Aires, which would be part of the autonomous governorship of Peru, and so began the system of New Andalusia of the River Plate in Paraguay. However, Governor Hernando Arias Saavedra, seeing the fertile lands of the Eastern Strip, would begin to populate it with cattle, establishing the sea cattle ranches, which would be the origin of the livestock wealth that Uruguay maintains to this day. Of course, this would attract the attention of the Portuguese, who in 1680 would establish the colony of Sacramento on the eastern margin of the River Plate opposite Buenos Aires, violating the Treaty of Tordesillas. The Spaniards, for their part, would found Montevideo in 1724 after evicting some Portuguese fortifications the previous year. At first, Montevideo would serve as a military fortress, but over time it would become a new trading port that would compete with Buenos Aires. Eventually, the city would begin to be populated by Spaniards, even though the vast majority of the Eastern Strip was still occupied by Portuguese. And as you can imagine, amid rising tensions, the Spanish-Portuguese War would occur, in which the Spaniards would try to take the colony of Sacramento without success. The Treaty of Madrid was signed around 1750 to prevent future conflicts between the Eastern Strip powers, marking the first war agreement between them, beginning to lay the foundation of the boundaries of the Portuguese and Spanish domains. In the region that concerns us, Spain would keep Colonial, in exchange for ceding the eastern missions to Portugal. A year later, the government of Montevideo would be created for better control. The missions, where the Guaranese with pro-Jesuit verses remained, would be jointly invaded by Spaniards and Portuguese during the Guarani War. Although it did not happen in Uruguayan territory, it interests us, because several expelled indigenous people would look towards the Eastern Strip. By 1777, the Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata would be created in an attempt to decentralize power from Peru, as territorial disputes warranted it. That same year, the Treaty of San Ildefonso would be signed, in which the borders between Spain and Portugal would be finally delimited. It claims its sovereignty over Sacramento in exchange for withdrawing from Santa Catalina Island. At the beginning of the 19th century, the Napoleonic Wars would start in Europe, which the United Kingdom would take advantage of to carry out 2 invasions of the Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata to annex it, expeditions that would end in failure. It should be noted that during the first one, in which Buenos Aires would be taken, the British would be expelled by a contingent coming from monarchs, such as the Montevideos. Faced with the decline of the Spanish Empire, and seeing that the people of the Rio de la Plata had already demonstrated that they could defend themselves, they would declare their independence during the May Revolution, creating the United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata. One of the leaders who participated in the independence, José Gervasio Artigas, would unify the cities of the Eastern Bank into the Eastern Province in 1813. The state of Uruguay would begin to take shape. Another feat of Artigas would be to lead the League of Free Peoples, a confederation of allied provinces within the provinces of the Rio de la Plata, made up of Corrientes, Entre Rios, Santa Fe Province, Misiones, and the Eastern Province. Hence the title of Protector of the Free Peoples. While Rio de la Plata was facing both internal and external conflicts against Spain, Portugal and Brazil had unified into the United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and Algarve, which now, stronger than before, would invade the Eastern Province, annexing it after defeating Artigas's army. The Luso-Brazilian victory would be sealed with the Battle of Tacuarembó. After that defeat, Artigas would be exiled to Asunción, and the Eastern Province would become the Cisplatine Province, governed by Carlos Federico Licoro in the Brazilian War of Independence. This would end with the independence of the Brazilians, who would retain sovereignty over Cisplatina. In April 1825, the liberation expedition of the 33 Orientals would take place, an independence attempt led by Juan Antonio Lavalleja, which would be followed by the War of Brazil, in which the Rio Platenses would try to recover the Eastern Province. After the maritime blockades that interfered with international trade, the United Kingdom would mediate peace in which free navigation of the River Plate would be allowed, and the independence of the Eastern Province would be recognized. The eastern state of Uruguay was born, and now that they have an independent state, it's time to take over the territories, right? In 1831, the Salcapuedes massacre would take place, where about 40 Charruas would be killed, and several others would be taken as prisoners, although others say this was a genocide. What do you think? As for the political part, well, as usual in the region, it started with strong instability. 2 political parties would enter into constant conflicts: the Colorado, on the Argentine unitary side, and the Blanco, which supported the federals, that is, the government of the Argentine Confederation. Tensions would explode within Uruguayan territory, with the Great War, in which the Blancos, in charge of the government, supported by Argentina, would face the Colorados, supported by France, the United Kingdom, Brazil, and the Argentine Unitarians. Victory of the Colorados, with the rise of Fructuoso Rivera to power. For his part, the leader of the Blancos, Manuel Uribe, would also proclaim himself as president of the Cerrito government. Yes, Uruguay had 2 presidents partially recognized by the international community. The Blancos and Colorados would also participate in other international conflicts, such as the Paraná War and the Platine War, in which the Colorado government would support Brazil. As a result, Brazilians achieved hegemony over the La Plata Basin in 1851, the same year that the Cerrito government would also end. But the bloodiest war in which Uruguay would participate would be the War of the Triple Alliance, which happened like this. The Blancos, now in charge of the government, with Atanasio Cruz Aguirre, were in civil war as usual with the Colorados, after the Libertadora Crusade, in which General Venancio Flores sought to reclaim the freedoms of his party. The following year, the Colorados would receive support from Brazil, which would invade the eastern country, and establish a de facto government under the command of Flores, and of course, incidentally, sign a defense alliance. Paraguay, who supported the Blanco government, had warned that it would consider any aggression as an attack on the balance of the region, so in response to the Brazilian invasion, Paraguay would capture a merchant ship. The bloody war had begun, and it would end in a decisive defeat for Paraguay, which would suffer a demographic catastrophe. As for Uruguay, the benefit went to the Colorado Party, which remained in power in the following decades. In what remained of the 19th century, Uruguay would continue with more civil wars, such as the Revolution of the Lances, the Tricolor Revolution, and the revolutions of 1897 and 1904. This last one would close this period of internal instability with the victory of the Colorado Party, although with an amnesty along with a constitutional reform that achieved the claims of the National Party. With this, Uruguay finally achieves peace. The beginning of the 20th century, known as the Batlista era, was characterized by the consolidation of democracy, an increase in European migration, especially Spanish and Italian, and an economic boom that brought high levels of well-being to Uruguay, earning it the reputation of the Switzerland of America. The economy was based on exports of livestock raw materials, such as meat and wool. However, this prosperity would begin to deteriorate around 1955 with an economic crisis that turned into a political one. In the 60s, some revolutionary groups would begin to emerge, such as the Tupamaros, which would lean towards urban guerrilla warfare. These leftist groups would have their counterpart in far-right movements like Juventud Uruguaya de Pie. This instability would be exploited by the armed forces to gain prominence. In 1973, the elected president, Juan Maria Bordaberry, in an attempt to prevent the growth of communist influence, would sponsor a coup in which the parliament would be dissolved, and with the support of the armed forces, he would create a state council, thus initiating the period of civic-military dictatorship. After the rejection of the constitutional plebiscite of 1980, in which the dictatorial regime was sought to be legitimized, a process of political reopening would take place, returning to democracy in 1985. Things continued as normal until 2002, when Uruguay would fall into a deep banking crisis, which perhaps would start to make Uruguayans distrust the traditional parties that had been governing the country for almost all of its history. But by 2004, this would end with the rise to power of the Broad Front Party of a leftist and progressive nature, to which the Tupamaros movement would join. With the alternating governments of Tabaré Vázquez and José Mujica, Uruguay has managed to achieve a political, social, and economic possibility, re-establishing itself as one of the most developed countries in the region, and once again becoming one of the pioneering countries in controversial reforms such as the decriminalization of abortion, LGBT marriage, and the legalization of recreational cannabis. And with this, we have reached the present day. And what do you think of Uruguay? Do you think it really suits the nickname of the Switzerland of America? Don't forget to leave your comment, and if you like this video, support me with a like and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.